Today we are going to look at another interesting chapter from the Buddha and his Dhamma, from the book 3, part 4, what is not Dhamma, and the chapter 7th in this part 4 is titled as Reading Books of Dhamma is not Dhamma. This topic requires a bit of detailing out as to why the Buddha and Baba Sahib Ambedkar will insist on reading books of Dhamma is not Dhamma. And because we see that Buddhism is one of the well published or printed quote and unquote religion in the world. And we have so many websites, so many teachers talking about the Dhamma. There are books published almost every day on Buddhism. So Buddhism is something, a religion that has been, well represented in terms of the literary forms. And we know that at the time of the Buddha, there were, of course, not the books, but there was a method of continuous recitation. So when we think about these particular questions of reading books of Dhamma is not Dhamma, what does it really mean is a very interesting question to look at when we are thinking about this heading of the chapter today. So as I said, that at the time of the Buddha, there were no books because the art of writing was just being developed. But there were people who were dedicated to the recitation of certain sutras and certain teachings of the Buddha. And the Buddha has, in fact, asked his followers to commit to memory a lot of the teachings that he has given to his disciples. And we know that the Buddha was not after how the sound of the recitation, but the meaning that was there conveyed by those recitations. And interestingly, we know now that most of the things that has been handed down to us, particularly through Pali text, are the words of the Buddha, and we can see the stamp of the Buddha all over the places in the Pali Tripitaka. But having said that, the books are meant to a guide or to kind of direction that we should have when we when we practice the Dhamma. And of course, there is a term in Pali or in Buddhism which is called the Sutamai Prajna. So that at the time of the Buddha, a lot of knowledge was coming through what is called the hearing or listening. And we have the term called Savaka Sangha, the Sangha of the Savakas. So there is, of course, the knowledge gained by reading, or at that time, the knowledge gained by listening or hearing a lot of things from different people and, going to different areas. So let's look at this chapter number 7, reading books of Dhamma is not Dhamma. So there was a group of class in the ancient India which always laid emphasis on knowledge, and the Buddha, as we know that he was after wisdom, and but the Brahmins used to boast that they are emphasizing on knowledge, and they thought that knowledge was the be all and end all of everything. They thought that without Vidu means knowledge, Vedas. And without the knowledge of the Vedas, it's everything. It's be all and end all. Nothing further was to be considered. So that was the position of the Brahmins then, that the only form of knowledge they hold as true or real was the knowledge of the Vedas, and their logical system is all developed all around what is called the Veda Pramanya. Whether it's written in the Vedas, if it's written in the Vedas, they are going to accept it as true. If it is not written in the Vedas, they are not going to accept it as true. So Ved was the ultimate measure of everything, the ultimate Praman of everything according to their scheme of things. Now, when it comes to Buddha, we know that he has opened the gateways of knowledge for all the sentient beings. There was no difference whatsoever in the mind of the Buddha about the class of the people. The Buddha loved all. Buddha opened the gates of knowledge for everybody. So as Baba Ambedkar has emphasized in the verse number 2, that the Buddha was, on the other hand, an upholder of education. So, if we can think about Buddhism, we can think about Buddhism in terms of education. It's education system. And I think this word is very important, that Buddhism as education of mind, body, and speech. And we know that as Buddhism developed in India further, and the Buddhists started recitation, and the Buddhists were, I think, in the history of the religion or the world, the first people to put everything on writing. And when the Buddhists started writing, they started compiling sutras all over the places in our country, and in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, all over the places. And it is said that when they compiled all these sutras, which were scattered throughout the length and breadth of the Indian subcontinent, they needed to compile it together, edit it together. And that's how this system of the university education came into being. And that's why we see that these great universities like Takshila or Nalanda, they were the universities which compiled a lot of Buddhist suttas together. And they were all scattered. It's said that the great philosopher in the Buddhist tradition, Nagarjuna, walked all over the places throughout India, and he gathered as many sutras as possible, and he compiled them into the certain sutras. So you see this, Buddhism and Buddha was, for education for all. He didn't want to stop anybody from not getting education. He wanted everybody, irrespective of their social standing, to get education. And besides acquiring knowledge, the Buddha was very concerned with how that knowledge can be used. That was what important for the Buddha. So you talk about all the knowledge in the world, you talk about all the things in the world, but if we don't know how to make use of the knowledge, that knowledge is useless. So let me read this very beautiful sentence here from the verse number 2. Besides, he was more concerned with the use of knowledge a man is likely to make than with knowledge itself. You see, this statement is very profound, because we all argue with each other, we all talk with each other in terms of the knowledge that we have, and we argue based on the whatever the ideas we have in our mind. But here, what the Buddha was after, he was after the use of knowledge, not the knowledge for the sake of knowledge, how it can be used for the benefit of the society, for the benefit of the humanity. And I think that point we cannot underestimate, because that's a very important point. So the verse number 2, I'm going to read again. The Buddha was, on the other hand, an upholder of education for all. Besides, he was more concerned with the use of knowledge a man is likely to make than with knowledge itself. So you see, this particular sentence should be enough for us to, not to show up for knowledge, but to use it for the benefit of the humanity. And then we know that the Buddha's traditional teaching of the Sila, he says that if you have a knowledge and if you do not have Sila or virtue, then that knowledge was dangerous. And that's what Baba Ambedkar has emphasized in the verse number 3. Consequently, he was very particular to emphasize that he who has knowledge must have Shila. And that knowledge without Shila, virtue, was most dangerous. So you see, we are coming to a point here, even we have to guard against reading the book of the Dhamma. We should read the books of the Dhamma, because there is so much to be read, and the Buddha has also asked us to cultivate our Sutamai Prajna, that is the Prajna that develops through listening, hearing, and in today's word, reading, because that is one of the ways by which we can cultivate our Prajna. But mere reading the books of the Dhamma is not Dhamma. That is what is categorically being said here. The importance of Sila as against Prajna is well illustrated by what he told the Bhikshu Patisena. Now, the story of Bhikshu Patisena is very interesting, and we might be familiar with the story of a Patisena who wanted to, read so much and understand so much, but he couldn't, because he might be an illiterate monk, and he couldn't get hold of a lot of Buddhist sutras to commit to his memory. But let's look at the story, because I think the story is very interesting, and the story sort of exposes the importance of Sila vis-a-vis the importance of human knowledge. So that time the Buddha was residing in Shravasti, his one of the favorite places where Buddha offered like to stay. And there was an old mendicant called Patisen, who being by nature cross and dull, who was dull and cross, could not learn so much as one gatha by heart. So, in Buddhism, there are a lot of gathas. Like in Dhammapad, there are more than 400 gathas, and in Sutta Nipat, there are many gathas. And I understand that the first way the Buddha taught was in terms of the gathas, because the gathas were in the poetic form. They were very easy to recite, and they were easy to transfer from one mind to another, because that was the beauty of the gathas, because they were in the poetic form. They had certain musicality to it, they had certain sonority to it, so they were very easy from to transform from one mind to another mind. So this man Patisen, he was an old man, and however hard he tried to commit to his memories the gathas, he couldn't, because by nature he was cross and dull. These are the words used here, that by nature Patisena, Bhikshu Patisena was cross and dull. The Buddha accordingly ordered 500 errands day by day to instruct him. So Buddha was a very compassionate man. So whoever wanted to learn the Dhamma, the Buddha made it a point that they should be instructed properly in the Dhamma. That was the compassion of the Buddha. Even at the last stage of his life, when Subhadra went and he pleaded for becoming a bhikshu, the Buddha gave him the diksha that time. Even at the deathbed, that the Buddha did it. So he was very particular for instructing the people who wanted to understand his Dhamma. And here you see, it might be an exaggeration, but it shows the seriousness of the Buddha to instruct anybody who ever wanted to learn his Dhamma. So accordingly, the Buddha ordered 500 arhants day by day to instruct Patisen. But after 3 years, he still was unable to remember even one gatha. So 3 years passed, and Patisen was not able to recite or remember one gatha. And that is a very hopeless situation. 500 arhants are trying to instruct you, teach you the gathas, and you are not able to recite or even memorize one of the gathas. That's a very pathetic situation. That's a very serious situation for anyone. So then all the people of the country, like it happens, the four order of the people means the fourfold Sangha, the Bhikshu Sangha, Bhikshuni Sangha, Upasaka Sangha, and Upasika Sangha. They knowing the ignorance of Patisen, started ridiculing him. They started ridiculing him. They started making fun of Patisen. So the Buddha, of course, is a great compassionate teacher. We know that he was the compassionate teacher par excellence. He has nothing to hold on to. And he has given everything. There is no outside or inside. The Buddha has taught everything that he understood or he knew to his disciples. So he was very compassionate. Buddha went to Patisen and he taught him one gatha. So he asked him to remember this gatha. Now this gatha, I think, is very important for us even to understand this gatha. And if we can, we have to then I will find the Pali Gatha exactly where it is in the suttas. So this Gatha goes like this. The Gatha which the Buddha taught to Patisena goes like this. He who guards his mouth and restrains his thoughts, he who offends not with his body, the man who acts thus shall obtain deliverance. Now you see these are 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 sentences in total. That means a single gatha. And this single gatha, according to Buddha, promises deliverance. That means this gatha is a very deep gatha, that it promises deliverance for all. And what is this gatha is all about? This gatha is about our body, speech, and mind. And in Buddhism, all human beings are considered to be made up of, or they are not made up of, they are their bodies, their minds, and their speech. And the Buddha's analysis goes deeper into that. Buddha goes and analyzes what is body, what is mind, what is speech. And we all know that these 3 words, kaya, vacha, mana, are so important in Buddhism. If we can understand how to train our kaya, how to train our mind, how to train our speech, vacha, then that is it. We don't need any other teachings other than that. And that is what the Buddha taught, the essence of Buddhism the Buddha taught. He taught, he who guards his mouth. So, someone who can know when to speak, what to speak, how to speak, and why to speak. That means somebody is having the complete control over the tongue, the complete control over the speech, what the Buddha called right speech. And this is, in the Noble Eightfold Path, the right speech is the part of the Noble Eightfold Path. And we know that the right speech has various elements, like, not speaking which is not true, not speaking without a purpose, always speaking the truth, not using the harsh language, not using the divisive language, so on and so forth. So you see this, the guarding the mouth, or training the speech is the part of the Noble Eightfold Path. Secondly, restrain his thoughts. That means controlling the mind. And we know that in Buddhism, the prime most importance is given to controlling the mind. And we know that in the Noble Eightfold Path, there are the wings which are devoted to how we can control the mind, how we can look after our minds. And he who offends not with his body, and not offending other people with one's body is also a very important aspect of Buddhism. The very Panchashil begins with not offending others with one's body. So you see now the context, that there is a monk Patisen, Bhikkhu Patisen, who is not able to remember or memorize or recite one single gatha, even after 500 arhants taught him for 3 years. And Patisen is feeling miserably because he by nature very cross and very dull. He can't understand, he can't get the meanings of various gathas that have been taught to him by 500 arhants. And the Buddha, taking with his boundless compassion, has taught Patisen very carefully the only single gatha. And the Buddha says that, if one practices like this single gatha has a potential for deliverance, the potential of Nibbana. And then the Buddha teaches the gatha, and this gatha goes like this: he who guards his mouth and restrains his thoughts, he who offends not with his body, the man who acts thus shall obtain deliverance. So kaya vacha mana. And we know that the kaya vacha mana is a very much, the training of kaya vacha mana is the very much, is the essence of Buddhism, without which the Buddhism doesn't stand. And that is the way to the enlightenment. So we have to guard our mouth, that means right speech. Then we have to restrain our thoughts, that means working on our minds, training our minds the way the Buddha has taught in the Noble Eightfold Path, and ultimately not offending with the body. Kaya vacha mana. So then, when the Buddha was teaching him with compassion this gatha, what is saying? He was moved by the compassion of the Buddha, and then felt his heart opened when the Buddha explained him this very beautiful gatha, the essence of Buddhism. He felt his heart open, and once he repeated the stanza. So he repeated the stanza once. He could do that. The Buddha then addressed him further. The Buddha said, taught him further, you now an old man. He said, you now an old man can repeat a stanza, a gatha only, and men know this, and they will still ridicule you. Therefore, I will now explain the meaning of the verse to you, and do you on your part attentively listen. So you see, Buddha was a very compassionate man. He knew that even after Patisena could recite one gatha, the other people will ridicule him. So he said, okay, now you can recite, you can memorize this gatha. I'm going to explain you the meaning of this. And in the following stanzas, following way, the Buddha has explained this teaching to him. Then the Buddha declared the 3 causes connected with the body, the 4 connected with mouth, and the 3 connected with the thoughts, by destroying which men might obtain deliverance, on which the mendicant, fully realizing the truth, thus explained, obtained the condition of an arahant. So you see the 3 way by which our bodies are connected to the world. in terms of, we know that in terms of Panati Pata Veramani. So if we restrain from taking life, our bodies are free. If we are, we refrain from not taking what is not given to us, that means we cultivate the deep sense of dana, our body is free. And then we do not indulge into sensual pleasures, then our bodies are also free. So three ways our bodies are connected with the world. One, by the way of taking the life, we are connected, our bodies are connected with the world. And we know that by taking what is not given, our bodies are connected to the world, and by indulging into the sensuality, our bodies are connected to the world. And then there are four ways our mouths are connected to the world, and we have seen that by lying, by foolish babble, by divisive speech, and by harsh speech. And the mind is connected to the world, by three ways: by intoxicating, by not remaining alert, by carrying on with the ignorant thoughts. So you see, all this Buddhism is connecting into these three gathas that the Buddha taught to Patisen. And I'm going to repeat it again, the verse number 10. Then the Buddha declared the three causes connected with the body, the four connected with mouth, and the three connected with the thoughts, by destroying which men might obtain deliverance, on which, listening to this, on which the mendicant, fully realizing the truth, thus explained, obtained the condition of an arhat. And realizing the truth of this gatha, the real meaning of this gatha, Patisen became arhat. He was free. He was free from the shackles of body, mind, and speech. He was free. Now at this time, there were 500 bhikkhunis dwelling in their vihara. So as we have seen that how the Buddha was, has taught Patisen, and where Patisen has learnt one gatha, and based on reading and understanding of one gatha, Patisena got enlightened. And now at that time, there were 500 bhikshunis who were living in a vihara, and they sent one of their members to the Buddha to request him to send them a priest or a monk to instruct them in the Dhamma. On hearing their request, the Buddha desired the old mendicant Patisen to go to them for this purpose. So, this, when the Bhikshunis went to the Buddha to request him to, help them with one Dhamma teacher, and the Buddha recommended name of Patisen. And, the monks, when the nuns came to know that the Buddha has deputed Patisen to give a Dhamma talk to them, they were all laughing. They were all thinking that, this tomorrow, this, this cross and dull-headed Patisen is going to come to us and is going to teach us. So they were, of course, very much, ridiculing it. And on knowing that this arrangement has been made, all the nuns began to laugh together and agreed on the morrow when he came to say the gatha wrong backward, and so confused the old man and put him to shame. So that was the Bhikshuni's plan, that when this monk will visit them, they will recite this gatha from, from the backward way, and they will confuse the monk Patisen so that he won't be able to recite or teach the gatha, and therefore the old man will be confused and he will have shame. They will put him to shame. Then on the morrow when he came, all the bhikshunis, great and small, went forth to salute him, and as they did so, they looked at one another and smiled. So they all smiled because they knew that now they are going to ridicule the monk. Then sitting down, they offered him food, having eaten and washed his hands. Then they begged him to begin his sermon, on which the aged mendicant ascended the elevated seat, and sitting down, he began. So that's how sitting down he began. Sisters, my talent is small. That's what Patisen said. My learning is very little. My learning is very little. That's what Patisen said. I know only one gatha, but I will repeat that and explain its meaning. So Venerable Patisen told them that he knew only one gatha, and he is going to explain the meaning of that gatha to them. And what was that gatha? That gatha has been already studied by us, and the same gatha that the Buddha taught to Patisen. So, do you listen with attention and understand? So that is what Venerable Patisen, the monk Patisen, told the Bhikshunis, that please listen to this with attention and understand. Then all the young nuns began to attempt to say the Gatha backwards. So there was a commotion in the assembly. All the women there, all the bhikshunis there, they started, the young ones particularly, they started repeating the Gatha backwards. But lo, they could not open their mouths. They couldn't open their mouths. They attempted to recite the Gatha backwards, but they couldn't open their mouth. And filled with shame, they hung down their heads in sorrow. So they were so full of shame now themselves that they, hung down their heads in sorrow. Then Patisena, having repeated the Gatha, began to explain it as the Buddha instructed him. And as we have seen, because he was Arhant, he knew the meaning of it. He was not just reciting the words, but he was also explaining the meaning of the words as taught to him by the Buddha. So then Patisena, having repeated the Gatha, began to explain it as the Buddha instructed him. Then all the bhikshunis hearing his words were filled with surprises, because they couldn't understand that how this monk, who was considered to be cross and dull, can recite this Gatha so beautifully and explain them so wonderfully. And rejoicing to hear such instruction, with one heart they received it and became arhants. So that was the power of the Gatha that Patisena explained to them in his Dhamma talk. And on hearing that, the bhikshunis attained to the reality. They understood the truth as it was. On the day after this, the king Prasennajit invited the Buddha and the whole congregation of the priests to assemble at his palace to partake of hospitality. So the next day, the Buddha, along with his monks, were invited, along with his followers, were invited to the palace of Prasennajit. And the Buddha, therefore, recognizing the superior and reverend appearance of Patisena, desired him to bear his alms dish and follow him as he went. So you see, the Buddha, because the Buddha saw that now Patisena has become the Arhan and he has understood his Dhamma. So when they were entering his palace, the Buddha has asked Patisena to hold his begging bowl. So Buddha had always this Pindapat, the begging bowl. So Buddha asked Venerable Patisena to hold it. But when they came to the palace gate, the porter, knowing this character, the character of Patisena, that he is a stupid, he is a cross, he is a muddle-headed man, would not let him go into the hall, saying, "We have no hospitality for a priest who knows but one Gatha." He says that we have no hospitality, we are not going to extend any hospitality to someone who knows only one Gatha. There is no room for such common fellows as you. Make place for your betters and be gone. Patisena accordingly sat down outside the door. So Patisena, because he was refused to enter, refused an entry into the palace, he sat down outside. The Buddha now ascended the dais after having washed his hands, and lo, the arms of Patisena with the alms dish in its hand entered the room. So when he wanted his begging bowl, of course, Patisena has to come. Then the king and the ministers and all the assembly, seeing this sight, were filled with astonishment and said, "Ah, who is this?" So they asked, "Oh, who is this man?" On which the Buddha replied, "It is Patisena, the mendicant. He has but just obtained enlightenment, and I desire him to bear my alms dish behind me, but the porter has refused him admission." On this, he was admitted and entered the assembly. Then Prasennajit, turning to the Buddha, said, "I hear that this Patisena is a man of small ability and knows only one Gatha. How then has he obtained the supreme wisdom?" So Prasennajit was even very curious. He said that this monk Patisena knows only one Gatha. How could he attain to supreme enlightenment? He said, to this the Buddha replied, "Living need not be much. Conduct, sila is the first thing. Learning need not be much. Conduct, sila is the first thing." So that is what the Buddha told about Patisena to Prasennajit. He told him that learning need not be much. We don't have to learn a lot of things, but if we can if we can work on our body, mind, and speech, that is everything. That is the first thing. This Patisena has allowed the secret virtue of the words of this one Gatha to penetrate his spirit. Very interesting. This is very interesting. What the Buddha is saying, that the monk Patisena has allowed, what he has allowed the secret virtue of the words of this one Gatha to penetrate his spirit. So the Bhikkhu Patisena has allowed the essence of the Gathas, the essence of the Buddha's teachings, the essence of the words to enter into his mind, his body and mouth. His body, mouth, and thoughts have obtained perfect quietude. Now his mind is stilled, his body is stilled, and his body is stilled. For though a man knows ever so much, if his knowledge reaches not to his life to deliver him from the power which leads to destruction, what benefit can all his learning be? And that is what the Buddha said. And I'm going to read it again. The verse number 28, 29, and 30. This is what I'm going to read again. Then Prasannaji, turning to Buddha, said, I hear that this Patisena is a man of small ability and knows only one Gatha. How then has he obtained the supreme wisdom? To which Buddha replied, learning need not be much. Conduct sila is the first thing. This Patisena has allowed the secret virtue of the words of this one Gatha to penetrate his spirit. His body, mouth, and thoughts have obtained perfect quietude. For though a man knows ever so much, if his knowledge reaches not to his life to deliver him from the power which leads to destruction, what big benefit can this learning be? This verse number 30 is very important. That, as the Buddha said, that we are always excited, we are always on fire, and it's very important to quench this, steal this fire. It's very important to quiet our body. It's very important to quieten our mind. It's very important to quieten our speech. And Buddha says that this is the beginning of the things. It is not that the beginning of the thing is the learning. He says learning needs not be much. We don't have to know much. Whatever we know, if we can understand the essence of it and practice it, that's enough. That's what the Buddha says. And he says that, that's what is required for one to attain the enlightenment. That is what is required for one to understand the reality as it is. Then the Buddha said, although a man repeats 1,000 stanzas section, but understand not the meaning of the lines he repeats, his performance is not equal to the repetition of one sentence well understood. One sentence well understood is important, much more beneficial than thousands of lines recited without understanding. And by reading so much, if one is not able to control thoughts, to repeat 1,000 words without understanding, what profit is there in this? But to understand one truth and hearing it, to act accordingly, this is to find deliverance. This is what is about the deliverance. A man may be able to repeat many books, but if he cannot explain them, what profit is there in this? But to explain one sentence of the law and to walk accordingly, this is the way to find supreme wisdom. On hearing these words, the 200 bhikshus and the king and his ministers were filled with joy. So you see, this topic or the chapter that we have covered today is a very important chapter, and it's about reading the books of the Dhamma is not Dhamma, where the Buddha has gone on to explain as to how mere reading or repeating thousands of the stanzas, thousands of the gathas, thousands of the words is not beneficial. But if we can understand one gatha, if we can understand it thoroughly and clearly, then that gatha has profound effect on us. And any learning which doesn't help us to transform our body, mind, and speech is not useful learning. That's what the Buddha is saying here in this particular chapter. So I think we can begin to see that how much emphasis even Baba Sahib Ambedkar has given to the Vinaya or Shila. And at one place, the Buddha says that the longevity of his Dhamma depends on the Vinaya, and Vinaya. So Vinaya, the Shila are so important because they are directly related to our practice. They are directly related to how we can live our lives, and therefore they are of very much importance. And therefore, I think this chapter, particularly the example of Patisen, is so important for all of us to bear in mind as to, he was not able to understand, he was not able to recite, he was not able to memorize, he was not able to remember the gathas, even when 500 arhants were employed to teach him. He couldn't do that. And the Buddha explained him just one gatha and he could recite it. He has committed it to his memory and he lived in accordance with that gatha. And finally, he was delivered. Finally, he was free from the bondage of the body, speech, and mind, and he attained to the enlightenment. And we see through this chapter how important it is for all of us to really know the teachings of the Buddha and put them in practice in our lives. So we will stop here, and if there are any questions, we will open up. Any questions or anything you would like to discuss?
Yes, sir. In verse number this 17, I think there is a philosophy hidden that kind of put light on it regarding Gatha backwards, means attempting to say the Gatha backwards.
Yes, the first Gatha they will recite last, isn't it? It's like trying to confuse him. So any song sung backward, like A B C D E F G, we say like that, starting from Z Y X.
Right, sir.
And you are right. Sometimes we have so much of a power to even recite the Gatha backwards. We know them so much, but we don't understand their meaning. Right, Umesh bhai?
Right, sir. Right, sir. Thank you.
Okay. So I think that is all for today. But I hope that we keep on reading this book even after the classes, and understand the meaning of this beautiful book that Baba Sahib Ambedkar has handed down to us. So thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Jai Bhim, Namo Buddhaya.
Thank you.